If you're new here, make sure to hit like, comment, and subscribe, because today's story is going to remind you exactly why you never underestimate a human. This is the tale of a cadet from a death world, a world so hostile even its grass bites back, and how he turned a simple pen into a weapon feared across the galaxy. Now, let's begin. The Galactic Officer Academy floated in the dark above Verlac like a polished silver spine, its ribs of glass and steel catching the light of 3 suns. Inside its walls, thousands of alien cadets trained to become commanders of fleets, hunters of beasts, and enforcers of interstellar law. They came from empires that stretched across hundreds of systems. And among them, there was one human. Eli Cross, 19 years old, from Earth. The only member of a species labeled Death World Class V by the Galactic Council, meaning everything on his home planet was capable of killing something. The Council had long decided humans were too volatile, too unpredictable, and too primitive for military service. Yet here he was, standing among serpentine warriors, chitin-armored arachnids, and telepathic amphibians, a scrawny, pale mammal holding a pen and a notebook. In the training hall, Commander Drix's voice cut through the clamor like steel scraping rock. Formations. Move with precision, not panic. Drixa was a Verlacian, reptilian, scales gleaming emerald beneath the light. He paced along the row of cadets, tail dragging, eyes narrowing at Eli. "And you, Deathworlder," he hissed, "perhaps today you'll remember which end of a plasma spear points toward your enemy." Laughter rippled through the ranks. Eli smiled faintly. He'd learned early that nothing rattled bullies faster than indifference. He twirled his practice spear once, the motion smooth, relaxed. "Depends," he said. "Sometimes the enemy's behind you." Drix's nostrils flared, but before he could retort, the training buzzer sounded. The hall's floor retracted into a massive pit, revealing the simulacrum arena, a combat simulation chamber that projected deadly illusions. The walls shimmered as jungle terrain unfolded around them, thick vines, alien insects, and distant roars. "Survive as a squad for 10 minutes, Drixa ordered. "Simulated predators. No shields. Begin." The environment darkened. The moment it did, the alien cadets clustered together, activating scanners, adjusting visors, and whispering strategies in alien tongues. Eli crouched low, scanning the undergrowth. Something moved, fast. Too fast. A blur darted through the trees and slammed into one of the cadets, shattering his armor into data fragments. The others screamed. Eli's instincts flared. He'd grown up camping in forests where silence meant a predator was near. He pressed his ear to the ground, then raised a hand. 3 incoming. "Front left ridge," he whispered. No one listened. They fired their plasma rifles wildly into the trees. The first illusion beast, a 6-legged pouncer with transparent skin, tore through them. Eli didn't bother with his rifle. Instead, he picked up a fallen training plate, snapped it in half, and used the reflective surface to track the creature's shimmer. When it lunged, he ducked and drove the broken shard into the base of its neck. The hologram flickered and collapsed. The others froze, watching. Drix's voice boomed over the intercom. Simulation paused. He stalked forward, examining the remains. "How did you detect it?" Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Refraction pattern. Movement of heat against air. You can't see it directly, but you can see what it bends." Some of the cadets exchanged uneasy looks. Drixa grunted. "Primitive eyes. Unrefined, yet functional. Perhaps the rumors about your world's cruelty are true." The simulation resumed. The next 10 minutes were a blur of chaos and improvisation, Eli using vines as snares, broken tech as noise distractions, and his pen to mark safe paths. When the timer ended, he was the only cadet still alive. Afterward, while others limped to the dormitory, Corin lumbered beside him. A towering Lornax, fur like black steel, amber eyes filled with both pride and disbelief. "You don't fight like us," Corin rumbled. "Yeah," Eli said, tucking the pen behind his ear. "That's why I'm still breathing." They reached the cadet quarters, where holoscreens displayed interstellar news, planetary sieges, starship victories, political treaties. All of it felt distant, untouchable. Eli sat on his bunk and began sketching the arena's layout, marking where the simulation had spawned the predators. Corin tilted his head. "You still use ink?" "Why?" Eli didn't look up. "Because memory implants glitch. Neural nets get hacked. But paper never lies." The door slid open with a hiss. Drixa entered, arms clasped behind his back. His tail flicked once. Annoyance. "Cross, you may possess instinct, but instinct is not discipline. Tomorrow you'll face a real test. The survival trial." No simulations. No pauses. Eli glanced up, unshaken. What kind of trial? The kind that separates soldiers from corpses, Drixa said, then turned sharply and left. Silence filled the room. Corin shifted uneasily. He means the outer habitat. Wild specimens. Real predators. Eli closed his notebook and leaned back. Good. I was starting to get bored. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the station's power core beneath them, a low vibration like a giant sleeping creature. Corin finally spoke. Your world, really as bad as they say? Eli's eyes darkened, memories flickering behind them. The red storms over Nevada, the screech of feral drones in the ruins, the scent of ash after the lightning fires. Worse, he said quietly. But it teaches you one thing. What's that? How to survive when nothing else does. Corin chuckled softly, then lay down on his bunk. Remind me never to visit Earth. Smart choice, Eli said and switched off the light. For a moment the room was peaceful, the calm before something vast and violent. Outside, beyond the station's hull, faint tremors rippled through the void. The defense sensors blinked once, then twice, registering movement at the edge of Verlac's orbit. Something large, fast, and not in the database. Eli stirred in his sleep as the first alarm echoed through the academy halls. A deep, metallic voice filled the corridors. Unscheduled contact detected. Apex predators inbound. His eyes opened. The room was bathed in red warning light. He exhaled once, steady and slow. Guess the trial came early, he murmured. And somewhere in the distant dark, a scream cut through the station like tearing steel. The academy trembled under the first impact. Sirens wailed across every corridor, their pulsing red light flashing against the metallic walls like a heartbeat in panic. Cadets poured out of their dorms, shouting in confusion, some still half-armored, others clutching data slates or weapons they didn't yet know how to use. The atmosphere reeked of ozone and fear. Eli was already on his feet, pulling on his uniform jacket, his eyes sharp and awake. Corin stumbled out behind him, still groggy, his claws scraping the floor. What's happening? He growled. Not a drill, Eli said. Something hit us. The station shook again, harder. A panel above them cracked open, sparks raining down. Eli grabbed Corin's arm and dragged him toward the corridor junction as an explosion tore through the hallway they'd just left. The shockwave threw them to the ground. When the smoke cleared, the hallway was gone, replaced by a ragged hole looking straight into space. Emergency shields sealed the breach a second later, shimmering blue across the vacuum. Eli coughed, his throat raw from burnt air. We need to get to command. Corin nodded, limping as they ran. The academy was chaos, alien cadets running in every direction, shouting in a dozen languages. The intercom stuttered with static, then Commander Drix's voice crackled through. All cadets to defensive positions. Repeat, the station is under attack. Unknown biosigns. The message cut out, replaced by a low growl that didn't sound mechanical. They reached the main atrium where a massive viewing dome revealed the horror outside. Dark shapes moved against the stars, dozens of them, sleek and alive, like serpents swimming through the void. One slammed into the hull, claws sinking into the metal. The glass canopy quivered. Corin stared in disbelief. What are those things? Eli narrowed his eyes. The creatures were shaped like nightmares, armored exoskeletons glistening under starlight, jaws splitting sideways, inner mouths lined with needle teeth. I've seen them in reports, he said quietly. Zerkai. Apex predators. Whole colonies wiped out by a single brood. The next impact shattered the observation window. The emergency shutters began closing, but 3 of the beasts had already forced their way inside. The cadets opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked across the chamber, splashing harmlessly off their black carapaces. One predator lunged, slicing through an insectoid cadet with a bone blade. The body dissolved in seconds, eaten away by acid blood. Eli ducked behind a pillar, grabbing a fallen weapon. The rifle was slick with acid, half melted. He tossed it aside and looked around, smoke, panic, screaming. None of them knew how to fight something like this. He shouted to the nearest cadet, "Cut the power to the lights. Do it now." The cadet hesitated. Why? Because they hunt by sound and heat. Eli snapped. Move. The lights dimmed instantly. In the sudden darkness, the predators hesitated, their movements slowing. Eli's ears caught faint clicks, echolocation pulses. He motioned to Corin. They're blind in the dark. Follow me. They crawled through the smoke toward a maintenance hatch. One of the Zerkai hissed and swept its tail across the floor, missing them by inches. Corin's tail brushed a metal pipe with a soft clang. The nearest predator froze, head tilting toward the noise. Eli yanked a metal bolt from his pocket and tossed it down the opposite corridor. The sound drew the creature away. They slipped through the hatch just as its claws scraped the wall beside them. Inside the maintenance duct, the noise was muffled but constant. Pounding claws, distant gunfire, screams. Corin's breathing was heavy, ragged. "This isn't a raid," he said. "It's a slaughter." "Then stop thinking like prey," Eli replied. "We're not dying here." They dropped out into a secondary hall lined with emergency lockers. Eli pried one open and scanned the contents. Med kits, repair tools, thermal paste, duct tape. No weapons. His jaw tightened. He tore a page from his notebook, sketching a quick map of the station's levels, marking air vents, coolant lines, power nodes. "If we can't kill them head-on, we make the station do it for us." Corin blinked. "You're going to fight them? With what?" Eli held up his pen, metal-cased, tipped with a retractable point that shimmered faintly under the red light. "Everything starts with a plan." They moved carefully through the lower decks. The air grew thicker with smoke and the scent of burned circuitry. They passed bodies, alien cadets torn apart, armor melted like wax. Corin's claws flexed nervously. There must have been hundreds of them. Why attack a training station? Eli's gaze hardened. Maybe we were easy prey. Or maybe someone wanted to see how we'd handle it. They reached the power control chamber. The door was half open, claw marks gouged deep into the frame. Inside, sparks leapt from shattered conduits. A single survivor, a scaled cadet, crouched beside a console, clutching a broken arm. "They took the command core," she gasped. "The predators, they learned. They're cutting power section by section." Eli helped her sit, scanning the flickering screens. The map showed red sectors spreading through the academy like infection. He traced the pattern. "They're herding survivors toward the center. The predators aren't feeding, they're studying." Corin's voice was low, dangerous. "That means they're smart." "Smarter than we thought," Eli said. "But they bleed. Everything bleeds." A shadow moved at the far end of the room. The cadet gasped as a massive form slid through the broken doorway. A Zerkai drone, blacker than space itself, its claws glinting with acid residue. It hissed, tasting the air. Eli motioned silently. Corin crouched, ready to spring. The predator advanced, step by step, until its head passed beneath an overhead conduit. Eli grabbed a spanner, twisted the valve hard. Superheated steam burst from the pipe, scalding the creature's face. It shrieked, thrashing wildly. Corin leapt, slamming into it with all his strength, driving it back into the pipe. The metal hissed, then burst, covering both of them in a cloud of vapor and burning acid. When the steam cleared, the creature lay still, carapace cracked. Corin staggered, clutching his shoulder where acid sizzled against fur. Eli pulled him back, ripping off a sleeve and pouring coolant fluid over the wound. The sizzling slowed. "You'll live," Eli said. Corin grimaced. "If that's living, your planet's definition of pain must be different from ours." Eli gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're not wrong." He checked the power readouts. The predators had breached the life support grid. Soon they'd control the entire station's oxygen flow. He needed to move faster. He scribbled another note, drawing arrows toward the reactor levels. "We need to turn the environment against them. Heat, pressure, gravity, it's all a weapon if you know where to look." Corin flexed his claws. "Then what are we waiting for?" Eli stood, slipping the pen back into his sleeve. "A good opportunity," he said. "And maybe a miracle." The station trembled again, a low, groaning sound that made the metal beneath their feet vibrate. Distantly, through the smoke, came the unmistakable echo of more hissing, more claws. Dozens of them. Eli looked toward the sealed corridor leading to the command spire. The red warning lights flickered, reflecting in his eyes. "They're not going to stop until they've killed everyone," he said quietly. Corin's ears twitched. "Then what do we do?" Eli's voice was calm, measured, deadly certain. "We stop running." Outside, the academy's hull screamed as another wave of predators breached the outer deck. Inside, a single human began sketching lines and symbols across a torn sheet of paper, whispering calculations under his breath. Each mark, each thought, each breath was preparation, not for escape but for war. In the distance, something massive roared, deeper and angrier than before. Eli didn't flinch. He only tightened his grip on the pen, its metal warm against his palm. "They think we're prey," he murmured. "Let's remind them what a death world really means." The deeper levels of the academy were silent except for the hiss of leaking gas and the distant clatter of claws on metal. Emergency lights flickered along the corridors, casting everything in red and shadow. Eli moved first, crouched low, eyes scanning every doorway. Corin followed, limping slightly but keeping his weapon ready. The smell of burnt circuitry mixed with something organic, acid and decay. It hung heavy in the air like the memory of death. They reached an access junction where 3 corridors met. The walls were lined with service panels, some half-melted. Eli crouched beside one, pried it open, and pulled out a bundle of fiber cables. He stripped them with his pen's metal edge and rewired the connection, watching as sparks jumped between the exposed lines. The overhead lights buzzed weakly to life. Corin frowned. "You're repairing power in a war zone?" "I'm diverting it," Eli said. "They're following the energy signatures. If I overload certain lines, I can make them chase ghosts while we move." He tapped the schematic he'd sketched earlier on a scrap of paper. It was smudged with blood but still legible: coolant tunnels, air ducts, waste chutes. "They've overrun the upper decks. That means they'll start venting the lower levels soon. We need to stay ahead of them." Corin's voice was a low rumble. "And the others?" "The cadets. Anyone still alive will be trying to reach the command core," Eli said. "If they get there first, they'll die there. The predators are driving them into a trap." He finished the connection, sealed the panel, and stood. "We're not following the herd." They moved through the corridors, stepping over bodies, some too burned to recognize, others frozen mid-scream. Eli didn't slow down. Every time he passed a working terminal, he downloaded system data onto a pocket chip, building a clearer map of the Academy's failing systems. At one intersection, a noise made him stop. Not claws, breathing. He raised a hand, signaling silence. From behind a half-collapsed bulkhead came a weak voice. "Help, someone please." Eli pried the wreckage aside, revealing a young cadet pinned beneath twisted steel. One leg was crushed. Her uniform bore Drix's command insignia. She looked barely conscious. "Stay still," Eli said. He examined the beam, calculating angles. "Corin, lift on my mark." The Lornax braced himself and heaved. The beam groaned, rising just enough for Eli to drag the cadet free. She gasped, clinging to him. "They killed everyone in the comms deck," she whispered. "Tore through the bulkheads. Drixa stayed behind to buy us time." "Did he make it?" Eli asked. Her eyes darted away. "I don't think so." Corin knelt beside her. "We can't carry her far." Eli pulled a stim injector from the med kit and pressed it to her neck. She winced as color returned to her face. "You can walk for a while," he said. "Stay quiet and stay close." They continued toward the engineering decks. Every step was measured. Every corner demanded silence. Once, a predator passed by the end of the corridor, its silhouette distorted, its movement unnaturally smooth. It paused, sniffing the air, then vanished into the dark. The 3 of them waited until even the echo of its claws faded before moving again. In the reactor hall, the air shimmered with heat. Massive columns of glowing plasma ran through the chamber, feeding the Academy's power grid. Several of the conduits had been ruptured, flooding the space with an eerie blue light. The hum of energy was deafening. Eli approached the control station and activated a local display. Data scrolled across the cracked screen. Power instability, coolant failure, core breach in progress. He studied it quickly. "We've got about 30 minutes before the reactor starts melting through the floor." Corin's ears flattened. "That's not much time to escape." "We're not escaping," Eli said. "Not yet." He pointed to the reactor schematic. "If we vent the auxiliary coolant into the sublevels, it'll flood the maintenance tunnels with freezing gas. The predators won't survive that. But someone has to trigger the manual release in person." The cadet stared at him. "That's suicide." "Not if I do it from the ducts," Eli said. "There's a manual override near the conduits. Small enough for me to crawl through. You 2 get to the evac pods and signal command." Corin growled softly. "I'm not leaving you alone." Eli met his gaze. "You will if you want this to work." He turned away before Corin could argue, moving toward the duct access hatch. His hands trembled slightly as he pried it open. Inside, the tunnel was narrow, filled with the metallic taste of coolant vapor. He took one last look at Corin and the cadet. "Lock the door behind me," he said. Then he crawled inside. The tunnel was cramped and sweltering. Pipes hissed inches from his face. Every movement sent echoes down the metal passage, and he forced himself to slow, to breathe quietly. Halfway through, he heard something scraping behind him. He froze. A faint clicking sound, a pattern of echoes. Eli clenched his jaw and turned off his wrist light. The tunnel went completely dark. He could hear his own heartbeat. The scraping grew louder, closer. Then it stopped. He waited, counting seconds. 1, 5, 10. Nothing. Slowly he resumed crawling. The sound returned instantly, faster this time. The realization hit him hard. The predators had found a way in. He moved faster, ignoring the pain in his shoulders as metal tore at his sleeves. Ahead, the override valve glowed faintly. He reached it, twisted the release clamp, and punched in the emergency code. The system hissed, gears turning somewhere deep below. A rush of cold air surged past him as the coolant began to flood the lower decks. Behind him, the scraping turned into a shriek. A black claw slashed into the tunnel, missing him by inches. Eli grabbed his pen and jammed it into the nearest control socket, forcing a short circuit. Electricity arced through the tunnel, lighting it in a flash of white. The predator convulsed, its body smashing against the metal walls, then fell silent. Eli crawled out of the duct, panting. His clothes were scorched, his hands shaking, but the vents above him roared as freezing gas spilled through the station. The air temperature dropped rapidly. Ice began forming along the floor. Corin and the cadet were waiting by the sealed bulkhead. When they saw him, Corin broke into a grin that quickly faded as he noticed the burns on Eli's arms. "You did it," he said. Eli nodded. "They'll freeze before they reach us. But we can't stay here, the core's unstable." They started back toward the upper decks. The corridors were filling with mist, the frozen air muting every sound. Bodies, both alien and predator, were encased in frost. The once glowing emergency lights flickered, fading into a cold blue haze. As they approached the central shaft, a voice crackled over the intercom, broken, faint, but recognizable. "All remaining units, regroup at command level." It was Drixa. He was alive. Corin looked at Eli. The commander survived. Eli exhaled slowly, watching his breath mist in the cold air. "Then we're not done yet." The cadet's voice trembled. "How do we fight something like this?" "They keep adapting." Eli looked down at his hand, the pen still glowing faintly from the charge. His expression hardened. "Then we'll adapt faster." Another tremor shook the floor beneath them. Somewhere far above, metal screamed and something enormous roared back in answer. Eli raised his eyes toward the ceiling, where dust drifted like falling snow. "Whatever that is," he said quietly, "it's bigger than the rest." Corin's grip tightened on his weapon. "Then we kill it." Eli tucked the pen behind his ear, his face lit by the flickering emergency light. "No," he said, voice steady. "We outthink it." And with that, he started climbing toward the command level, every step echoing through the frozen silence of the dying station. The command level was a ruin. The blast doors had half melted, and the floor was coated in a thin sheet of frost from the coolant purge. Smoke hung like a fog, curling around shattered consoles and the remains of once proud banners. Sparks leapt from open wiring, painting brief flashes of orange across the darkness. Eli led the way, his boots crunching over debris. Every sound echoed too loudly in the dead silence. Corin followed, his breath misting in the cold air. The young cadet limped behind them, clutching her side, still pale but alive. Ahead, the heavy airlocks to the command hall stood partially ajar. Beyond them, the low hum of machinery mixed with something deeper, a rhythmic growl that vibrated through the walls. Eli stopped just short of the doors. "That's not the reactor," he whispered. Corin's fur bristled. "Then what is it?" Eli peered through the narrow gap. Inside, the chamber was vast, circular, illuminated only by the pale glow of holographic screens still struggling to function. In the center, slumped against the main console, was Commander Drixa. His armor was scorched, his left arm missing below the elbow, but he was alive. And standing before him, towering and terrible, was a creature unlike any they had faced before. The Apex Alpha. Twice the size of the others, its carapace glistened black and silver, its chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate rhythm. Its head turned slightly, eyes like burning coals fixed on Drixa. Around its feet lay the remains of other cadets, some still smoking, others simply gone. Corin tensed, lowering himself instinctively. "How do you fight something like that?" Eli's gaze flicked to the room's layout, hollow consoles, coolant vents, ruptured conduits. "You don't fight it," he said quietly. "You trap it." He motioned for them to wait. Sliding a shard of broken metal into the door's sensor, he eased it open just wide enough to slip inside. Every movement was careful, silent. The air smelled of acid and electricity. The Alpha's breathing filled the space, a deep vibration that made the floor tremble. Eli moved along the shadows, crouching behind a fallen console. He could see Drixa now, barely conscious, bleeding from multiple wounds. The commander's one remaining eye focused on him for a moment, disbelief flickering there. Eli held a finger to his lips, then pointed toward the reactor coolant control embedded in the wall. Drixa understood. He gave a faint nod. The plan formed quickly, born from desperation and instinct. The Alpha was standing near the room's central coolant intake, its one structural weakness. If Eli could overload that line, the pressure would explode upward, venting cryogenic gas at lethal force. But the manual control was across the room, and there was no way to reach it without drawing attention. Eli reached into his sleeve and pulled out the pen. It was dented, scorched from the earlier fight, but still intact. He twisted off the cap, revealing a filament tip faintly glowing with charge. It wasn't a weapon, at least not yet. He unscrewed the back, exposed the small conductive wire, and connected it to the emergency console beside him. A low hum began to build. The Alpha shifted, lifting its head. It turned toward the sound, hissing softly. Eli froze, holding his breath. The creature moved closer, claws dragging across the floor. Each step sent vibrations up his legs. Its jaws opened, the inner mouth clicking. Before it could strike, a roar echoed from the doorway. Corin charged, plasma rifle blazing. Bolts slammed into the creature's chest, bursting in sparks but leaving no lasting damage. Still, it turned, diverted for a moment. That was all Eli needed. He lunged forward, sprinting to the control panel. The Alpha whirled, tail slicing through the air like a blade. The impact caught Eli across the ribs, throwing him into the wall. Pain flared white-hot. He gasped, clutching his side, but forced himself to his feet. His vision swam, the world narrowing to a single point, the control valve. Eli! Corin shouted, firing again. The Alpha turned toward him, its claws outstretched. Eli jammed his pen into the manual socket, twisting it until the live wire made contact. Sparks erupted, lighting the chamber in blinding flashes. The control panel flickered, then came alive. A warning siren screamed. Manual override initiated. The Alpha spun back toward him, shrieking. Its claws tore through metal as it charged. Eli slammed his hand onto the release trigger. The floor beneath the creature burst open, a geyser of freezing plasma erupting upward. The blast caught the Alpha full in the chest, coating its armor in a layer of crystal frost. It roared, thrashing violently, smashing consoles and walls. But the coolant wasn't enough to kill it. The ice began to crack. Eli stumbled backward, bleeding, his hands slipping on the slick floor. He could hear Drixa coughing behind him, trying to crawl away. Corin fired again and again, roaring in defiance. The creature lunged through the steam, its claws slicing across Corin's chest. The big alien fell hard, armor sparking. Something inside Eli broke then, not fear, not anger, but something colder. He picked up a fallen power cable, sparks dancing at its end. The Alpha raised a claw, ready to strike again. Eli looked at his pen, still jammed into the control socket, its metal tip now glowing white-hot. He grabbed the live cable and pressed it against the pen's exposed wire. The resulting flash blinded him. Electricity roared through the air, arcs leaping from metal to flesh. The pen became a conduit, channeling raw power straight into the coolant lines, and into the creature standing atop them. The Alpha convulsed, a soundless scream tearing from its throat. Cracks spread across its armor as molten light poured from within. The shockwave knocked Eli off his feet, throwing him across the room. When he opened his eyes, the creature was collapsing, its carapace shattering like glass. It hit the floor with a sound like thunder, then fell still. Silence followed, thick, disbelieving silence. The coolant vent hissed weakly, steam rising from the corpse. Eli lay on his back, gasping. His ears rang, his vision blurry. Somewhere nearby, Drixa was dragging himself upright, staring at the fallen Alpha. "You killed it," he rasped. Eli coughed, forcing a weak smile. "No. Physics did." Corin groaned, sitting up slowly. He looked at the creature's remains, then at Eli. "With a pen?" he said, almost laughing. "You killed it with a pen." Eli pulled the ruined object from the melted socket. The casing was blackened, warped beyond recognition. He turned it over once in his hand, then let it drop to the floor. "Guess I did." For a moment, none of them spoke. The station groaned around them, the distant reactor still rumbling. Drixa slumped against the wall, blood dripping from his scales. "We have to send a signal," he said. "The predators will regroup." Eli nodded faintly. Then let's make sure they find nothing left to regroup with. He pushed himself up, ribs aching, and looked out across the ruined command deck. The stars beyond the shattered viewport burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the galaxy still thought humans were fragile. Primitive. Weak. He smiled faintly at the thought. Let's prove them wrong. The sound of distant movement echoed through the halls again, a scraping chorus, faint but growing. Eli picked up the nearest plasma rifle and checked its charge. They're not done yet, Corin said. No, Eli answered, standing tall despite the blood on his uniform, but neither are we. He turned toward the shadows at the far end of the corridor, where the sound was coming from. The red light flickered across his face, half shadow, half fire. His hand twitched, almost missing the pen that was gone. Then his jaw set. Round 2, he said softly and started forward into the dark. The silence that followed the Alpha's fall was almost unbearable. The station groaned like a wounded animal, metal straining under its own weight. Smoke and frost mingled in the corridors, drifting in soft clouds that reflected the fading emergency lights. Eli leaned against a bulkhead, ribs aching, blood seeping through his uniform, yet his mind was already racing ahead. He scanned the command deck. Drixa, battered and barely standing, was giving orders through a cracked communicator, rallying the remaining cadets to secure the hallways. Corin slumped beside him, chest heaving, one claw still singed from the Alpha's attack. I didn't think we'd make it, he admitted, voice low, almost reverent. And yet here we are. Eli allowed himself a brief smile. We weren't just lucky. We outthought them. That's the difference between us and every other species they've faced. The young cadet who had survived the lower levels joined them, trembling but alert. Commander Drixa, he ordered the evac pods. We need to get out before the structure fails completely. Eli's eyes flicked toward the viewport. The outer hull had suffered extensive breaches. Fire and ice clashed in drifting shards of debris outside, like stars being torn apart. Evac pods first, he said. Then we report. We need command to know what happened here. They moved through the shattered corridors, stepping carefully over frost-coated debris. Every step was a reminder of how close they had come to death. Eli's mind wandered for a moment to Earth, to the forests and deserts that had shaped him, the endless nights spent facing storms, predators, and hunger. Those memories now felt like training sessions for a war he hadn't known he'd fight among the stars. At the evacuation chamber, the pods were lined up in neat bays, but most had been damaged or destroyed. Eli knelt beside the control console, fingers flying over the touch panel. Sparks flew, circuits threatened to arc, but with careful adjustments, the nearest pod hissed open. Corin helped the cadet inside, settling her onto the narrow bench while Eli ran a quick diagnostic. Drixa arrived a moment later, leaning heavily on a support beam. You saved the station, he rasped, voice gravelly. The predators, they would have slaughtered everyone. Eli shook his head. Not me alone. Strategy, timing, exploiting their instincts, they're just animals when you know their limits. Drix's remaining eye, sharp and wary, softened just slightly. On Earth they say humans are fragile. They lie. You are something else entirely. The pod doors sealed with a hiss and the systems hummed to life. Outside, the drifting ice and debris pressed against the bay viewport, reflecting light like a shattered mirror. Eli gave Corin a quick glance. You ready? The Lornax growled, flexing claws one last time. After you. The pod shot out into space, navigating the debris field with precision. Eli kept his hands on the console, monitoring the trajectory while his mind continued analyzing threat assessment, predator behavior, potential weak points. His world was one of calculation, of instinct refined by countless hazards. He had survived not because he was stronger or faster, but because he could think faster than death itself. Minutes later, the pod docked with a galactic command cruiser. Soldiers and officers swarmed to secure the evac bay, staring at Eli with a mix of awe and disbelief. News feeds from the Academy were streaming across the galaxy. Images of frozen corridors, scorched predators, and the lone human cadet standing among the wreckage. A senior officer approached, his face a mask of incredulity. Eli Cross, you survived an Apex Alpha attack with improvised tools? Eli shrugged, fatigue pressing into his posture. I survived with what I had. That's all any of us ever do. The officer's gaze shifted to Corin and the cadet, then back to Eli. The Alpha, it's never been killed. Entire fleets and colonies have fallen to it. Eli's lips curled into a faint smile. Apparently, it underestimated humans. The aftermath was both chaotic and celebratory. Drixa, still leaning on a support beam, formally saluted Eli. You have proven that a human is not merely a survivor of a death world. You are a strategist, a soldier, a weapon. The galaxy will remember this day. Eli accepted the salute with quiet dignity. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because we didn't have another choice. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Holofeeds and transmissions broadcast the story of a human cadet who had outsmarted, trapped, and killed an Apex Alpha using only his mind and a pen. Across the galaxy, whispers spread in military academies, council chambers and colony outposts. Earth produces predators in human form. Corin nudged Eli as they moved through the debriefing hall. You know, he said, if you'd done that with a laser rifle it would have been impressive. But a pen? That's ridiculous. Eli chuckled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. Ridiculous gets results. Drixa stepped forward, voice stern but tinged with respect. The council will want a full report. And you, human, will likely be recruited for specialized field operations. Your instincts, your adaptability, they're unparalleled. Eli's expression darkened momentarily. I don't need recruitment. I need purpose. He glanced at Corin and the cadet. We've survived this together. That's enough purpose for now. The command hall doors opened, revealing the expanse of space beyond the cruiser. Stars stretched into infinity, cold and indifferent. But Eli felt something different. A sense of belonging, a recognition that in a galaxy dominated by advanced weapons and towering fleets, the most unpredictable force remained the human mind. He turned to Corin. You know, back on Earth we'd call this Tuesday. Corin let out a low, incredulous laugh. Humans are insane. Eli smiled faintly, looking out into the stars. Maybe. But sometimes insane is exactly what the universe needs. The cadet beside them nodded, her eyes reflecting awe and determination. We'll tell everyone what happened. They'll know the human cadet didn't just survive. He led the fight. Eli tucked a small melted pen into his pocket, the relic of his improbable victory. Let's make sure they remember more than that, he said. We make them remember what it means to face a death world human. Outside the cruiser, distant debris from the academy drifted in silence. The Apex Alpha's remains had been reduced to shattered frost and fragments, proof that no creature, no matter how feared, was invincible. Inside, Eli Cross, the human cadet, stood with Corin and the survivor cadet, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at them next. And somewhere in the dark, among countless stars, the whisper began to spread. The humans are not weak. The humans are lethal. The humans survive where others fall. Eli's eyes narrowed, the faint curve of a smile tugging at his lips. Let them come, he said softly. We're ready. The stars waited, endless and indifferent, but the human mind was awake, calculating and unbroken. The legend of the Death World cadet had only just begun.